You have to do, oh wait, there's probably no votes today, but if there are, it'll have to be roll call because Malcolm is online.
Malcolm is online?
Yeah.
Okay. Good morning. Thank you for coming to the Washington Street Collaborative Work Group meeting. We're beginning the meeting today at 11:08. And we have Malcolm online and Alan here in person. Is there Matt here in person and Nat here in person? So, okay. So if we anticipate a vote, there'll be a roll call vote. Do you want me to put the agenda? Okay. I'm going to move forward with the current agenda. And do we have any public comment? I don't see any. iPhone, could you please identify yourself? Okay. Well, the question is, do we want to ask them to leave?
Well, either name for them.
We need, exactly.
Yeah.
So we need their name and if. No. All right, well, we might have to, can you? Yeah. Remove them. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. So we do not have any public comment, and we have minutes to approve.
We don't,
for
not
this
yet.
meeting. We do not have minutes to approve for this meeting. So moving on to agenda item number 3, we have schedule update, key decisions, and a whole series of topics for the Francis Street Beach Improvement Project, which I am going to allow Laura to take away. We have located the iPhone. Person has texted me, so.
Oh. Let me come back in.
And Laura, feel free to start anytime. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Do you see the full presentation view, not the slide sorter view?
Yes, yes, we do.
Okay, excellent. Great. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to see you. We're going to quickly touch today on the project schedule, just remind ourselves where we are. And then the main content of the meeting today is to hear the outcomes from the coastal modeling results and kind of takeaways for the project from Woods Hole Group, and then stormwater modeling results for the first couple of runs that we will hear from Hazen. We have some preliminary concept kind of cross sections that we're beginning to study, but that's going to be kind of amplified by Todd and the PAR team with their report out next week. So just a little preview of how we're beginning to think about the cross section. Just starting with the schedule. We all know where we've been. We're here just at the very beginning of schematic design. In terms of key dates, we will hear those updates today. And then next week on Friday, we'll be looking for you all to weigh in on vote on the preferred alternative in terms of the form that we should be advancing for schematic design based on all of these technical inputs that we'll be hearing this weekend next. So after that, we will begin preparing the technical documents for schematic design. Okay, so I am going to turn it to Kirk from Woods Hole Group. Kirk, do you prefer to share your screen or you want me to flip?
Either works from my perspective if you have everything.
I have it all here. So yeah, you can just tell me to click.
Okay, great. Can you just go back one slide first?
Of course. Yep.
Thanks. Yeah, so I'll give a summary of some of the coastal modeling results and takeaways that we did when we were looking at the Francis Street Beach mitigation project. And we looked at both the dune swoop and the beach overlook layouts in this. And so they're all there and available. There's very little difference on the coastal erosion maintenance type assessment between the two. There's a little bit more variation on the flood redirection and velocity concentration, but not substantially so. And the two types of modeling that we're really focused on here is one, the first case looks at, okay, we're putting this new project in at this location. How does that change over time, especially in the face of episodic storm events in normal tidal conditions? And in that process, what does that mean for potential maintenance of the project itself, right? It's a dune restoration, kind of beach enhancement project at its core. So what would be the maintenance requirements? Two, is there any significant damage that would occur to the project itself and or limit its effectiveness over time in some way? So to get to the heart of it, do you need more than just the dune, right? Do we need some kind of structural element piece to it? And then the third section of that is also maintenance relative to the Washington Street and the infrastructure behind the dune, right? Remember that the project isn't intended to stop every storm from flooding over the top of it. It's really working more to provide protection in the near to midterm and also longer term protection against normal tidal conditions if sea level rise goes at some projected level, right? And that has, depending on what happens with that actual sea level rise, that could be longer or shorter. So that maintenance of the roadway, meaning do we get overwash of sand where you're constantly going to be cleaning up the road because of this project that's in there. So that's one piece of the modeling. The second one is more of a regulatory thing, which looks at flood redirection and velocity concentration during storm events. So if we put this project in place, does it redirect floodwaters or concentrate velocities in a way that would be negative for neighboring properties or some other area? So those are the two models that we looked at it just to lay the groundwork there. Okay, go ahead. So the first one is this erosion piece, and we're looking at it in a cross-shore sense. So on the right-hand side of these figures is often to Nantucket, or the left-hand side is often to Nantucket Harbor, and then you proceed cross-shore or along shore or across the shoreline. So you're heading towards Washington Street, which would be on the right-hand side of the figure there. And so the top figure is what are the dash line in each figure. The top figure is kind of the overall view of the model. So we go a ways offshore where we're getting into 20 feet water depths in the harbor. And then the bottom figure is looking more closely at the project itself. And so the dash line is what kind of is out there now today. And then the red solid line is what is the proposed representative cross-section of the project, where we're going from an elevation of around, 5 or so up to an elevation about 8. And then the grain size is a medium-sized grain size, very similar to what's out there on the beach now that we would be filling to improve that beach and dune profile. Next slide. And so that's where this takes place. That's our representative cross-section. That's where we look at what the water levels and waves do as they cross Nantucket Harbor into that. All the information is based on data that we know observed at the Nantucket tide gauge and future projections based on Massachusetts coastal flood risk model with waves and water levels. Next slide. So this is what that kind of looks like. So we looked at 5 different level storm events ranging from, present day kind of 100-year condition that is provided by FEMA, and then 2032 years. So once a storm that occurs, once every 2 years, a 10-year return period in 2030 and 2050, and then a really big one in 2050, a 100-year storm event that's pretty substantial. So the curves on the bottom represent just what the water levels do over our hours of simulation. We simulate the model for over 175 hours, so pretty long. And there's that peak storm that rolls through around simulation hour 100 or so. And then the top is what the waves are doing. So that's the significant wave height that peaks out at around 3 feet of a wave height in this area. We're relatively sheltered in a harbor, but that's pretty still a fairly decent wave for that particular condition. Okay, next slide.
Can I ask a question? Does that
Yes.
mean in this big peak that you'd be seeing a 3-foot wave on top of the water level represented in the bottom graph?
Yes. Yep. So that is the storm passage. So that's what the waves are doing along the top over the 175 plus hours of simulation, and what the water levels are doing in the bottom of the 175 plus hours of simulation. So
Okay.
they are concurrent. Yeah.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Can we go back? Sorry, it's Matt. Can we go back one? I just have a quick question. Yep, the back one. Yeah, when you see this, is it building up on the, when you look at Great Harbor Yacht Club to the right of the red line? Is sand kind of building on that side, and is it scalloping on the other side?
We'll get to that.
Okay.
And
keep going.
Yeah, you will get to that. There's a figure that I have that will get into that a little bit more, but good question. Yep. You're just thinking ahead.
To just talk about one of the things that Matt is saying, the scalloping within
Yep.
that part of the harbour, scalloping is closed. I think it's from Grand Point.
I'm talking about
He
this.
doesn't need that.
I mean scouring. I meant scouring. I meant scouring. I'm butchering the language. Worse than you.
You're thinking of.
Worse than you, Vince. I'm sorry. All right.
Okay, so this is supposed to animate, Laura, so we might have to switch over to me.
Animated when I looked at it before. Oh, there we go. I just had to click.
Okay, yeah, great. All right, so this is what these kind of things look like. So it's going slow, but so the tides are going up and down. There's waves that are rolling in on top of this, which are a little harder to see at this scale. The top figure here is the existing conditions profile. So with no project in place, the bottom figure is with the project in place. So along the horizontal axis is the cross-shore distance as you head off into the harbor to the right, and on left is the backside is Washington Street. And this is a 2030 2-year storm event. So around simulation hour 100, you should have seen that the water level peaks and goes over the top of the existing conditions profile and floods the area behind it. And then in the proposed conditions, that's mitigated at this portion of the shoreline. So there you go. It just happened right there. What this model also does, if you go to the next slide, is then starts to show what happens with the sand movement in this condition. So there's a lot going on in these figures. Again, existing profile, no project in place is the top. Project in place is the bottom figure. And what you need to focus on is the initial layout of the profile is the black solid line there. And then the final profile, which is after the storm passes through, is the red profile. And so this is a relatively small storm, 2-year storm, right? It still causes flood conditions, but the water levels don't get excessively high, especially on the new proposed project, which is great, right? We're providing some flood mitigation there. But you notice there is sand that moves, right? So it goes essentially from where it is under the black area and gets pushed offshore, which is pretty standard. Is the way a beach would react during a storm event is it's trying to get sediment further offshore to break the wave energy before it hits its beach. It's trying to protect itself, right? It's like, if I can get these silly waves to break further offshore before they get to me, I'm going to try to do everything that I can do to do that. That's what erosion really is the beach's natural way of trying to protect itself. And so you can see how some of that sediment moves. The second thing you'll see, not necessarily in this storm event, is eventually you'll see sand that overwashes over the top and gets pushed back into the areas landward. And we'll see that as we go through some of these bigger storm events. So you can go to the next slide. So now we're getting a little bit bigger here. This is a 10% storm in 2050, so a 10-year return period event. And again, when we get to simulation hour 100 here coming up, you'll start to see the increases in water levels. And now what you saw there is you had overtopping of both the existing and the proposed scenario, right? Which is, again, this isn't intended to necessarily mitigate against every storm event, but it's now flooding in both those cases. Next slide. And then we can start to unpack a little bit more what happens with the profile. Now, This is a relatively stable area, and we'll get back to that whole point of where sand moves along shore and the scouring and all that kind of stuff. But generally, the beach profile, the existing or the proposed beach profile is really performing pretty well against these storm events. This is a 2030 storm event, sorry, not 2050. And it really is not eroding as much as you would think, which is actually a good thing. The next storm. And then here's like a really, really big event. This is 2050, 100-year condition. And this is the one that we really wanted to evaluate to see what was really going to happen with this profile here. There's the passage of the event. You can see multiple tides cause problems and flooding on the existing profile there. In fact, if you look close, you can see standing water behind the dune under existing profiles of flooding. Next slide. And so here's what we start to see, where you can actually see and the sand built up behind under the existing profile there. It gets up over 5 feet. So we have over a foot of sand that's gotten pushed back into Washington Street and beyond in this scenario. The existing beach profile does start to chip into the dune a little bit more. But again, it's relatively stable due to the fact that we're not getting tremendous wave energy here. And the design of the beach profile was such that we could try to break the wave energy before it gets to where the boardwalk infrastructure is. That doesn't mean that it's not flooding, right? So that blue dashed line you see at the top is the peak wave height, combined wave height water level. And that's getting over top of it, but we're not negatively damaging the dune itself that much because a lot of the energy is broken before it gets to that particular location, unlike existing conditions. Next slide. So from this particular model, the things we're looking at are here's some of the key takeaways. And to go back to the question about what's happening, the figure that I'm showing here is long-term shoreline rates of change. And so black essentially means it's a really, really stable beach. Pink indicates very minor erosion, which is what's happening at Francis Street. Green indicates actually an accretion of value. So that means sand is building up there. And then if you get into the darker reds and darker greens, that's where you have big change. So if you see a dark red, that's really significant erosion. You have major change in the shoreline and erosion happening in that location. So generally speaking, in Francis Street, we have some minor erosion, but it's not very significant. It's pretty mild. And then to the area just to the south with the harbor, we actually have a little bit of accretion in that area. So sand is getting pushed that way. And generally, I would say because of the orientation of this, there's very little movement here. The wave energy isn't that strong on a day-to-day basis. But if you do get events, the sediment tends to diverge and get pushed both to the north and south out of the center. So that shape of the beach, which has that slight concave inward, is a good indication of how that sand moves in the longshore direction, meaning it's going to get pushed from the center, both out to the north and the south in this area. But I would also tell you that is very, very minor. It's a very, very small movement of sediment in the longshore direction. Cross-shore movement is probably the dominant thing here. And even then, it takes a pretty big storm to move some of that. So key takeaways from this perspective with this project is it really does offer some near to midterm flood risk reduction for storm events. And then it's focused, as I mentioned, on long-term flood risk reduction for tidal flooding. As you guys all know, though, that's just one segment of the protection along all of Washington Street. So it's kind of the first step or first phase. It does flood in this area first, but it also will, flank this area as you go further and further out during storm events. There was a much higher occurrence of sediment overwash under existing conditions, where we saw up to 1 foot of sand deposit on Washington Street than we saw in proposed conditions, just because the dune really does provide some protection against that. Bookmark that, because we'll circle back around to that when we get to the second model. It was good to see that really minimal maintenance requirements are going to be expected out there. There's going to be some minor sand management that probably has to happen on the seaward side of the proposed project, but it was nothing drastic. Again, overtiming events do occur, but we didn't see damage directly to the proposed project itself, except at that seaward side. And finally, maybe the most important thing, we don't think yet we need to have any kind of internal dune core for this. However, we do think you're going to probably want some kind of landscape wall to limit sediment overwash. And I'll follow up on that or double down on that a little bit as we get into the second model. So that's the sediment movement model, that how the sand moves and how the project would perform. We also have to look at the second piece, which is the next slide. Which
Should we
really
let's pause for 1 second and see if there's questions about this piece of the modeling before we go to the other.
But you got a call to, we able to, can you hear us? Can they hear us?
I hear you now. Yeah, what's up?
Okay.
I think she didn't hear you.
Oh.
I didn't
okay.
hear the question. Sorry.
I didn't have one. I said you sounded like you have a cold like me.
Oh yeah, I think it's fall allergies. Yeah.
So, can I just,
Yeah.
okay, if I talk?
Yep.
Okay. I like the way he explains this stuff. He led into this at the last meeting. But after he shows all the colors, then he says, I'm thinking how the public thinks. I'm not, I have to do that because that is what the ultimate sale of this is going to be. Okay. At the end, he says things like, this is a relatively minor issue in this area, blah, blah, blah. That is important because the public already knows that. There's a lot of buildup. The town doesn't get rid of the seaweed on the beaches. You don't have to worry about erosion because there's seaweed down there. Like we used to get rid of it, now we don't do that. So anyway, but down in that Monomoy in the creeks area that he's got the different colors, I'm curious how they come up with that because that's a tough area to predict because there's a lot of protection there from just overall change because of the nature of that area is like already kind of self-protected. The other issue, Kirk, sort of asking you, but at the same time talking to everyone else. Wind, if it's an easterly wind, and I know you don't have the data, it's impossible to have that much data, but when you have an easterly wind, due east, right straight down from Walnut, that's when we have our problems down there. And of course, moon tides, coming tides, all that stuff. But normal wind from the west, which is usually the case here, northwest, you don't get any real issues down there. But it's that easterly storm or, just say, 40-mile-an-hour wind with tide, that is significant coming down the harbor. So that's all I'm saying. I don't know how you would, put that on the screen with all the, information, but this is totally different area than any beach that's open or even inside the harbor, to be honest. So that's all I have. I appreciate that.
Okay, so I heard two parts to the question. First was, Kirk, how do you arrive at this analysis, particularly in the creeks area that seems to be relatively protected?
Yeah,
And then the second
curious.
is, does it account for the easterly wind condition, which is atypical, but when we see the most challenge with the sediment transport?
Yep. So in terms of the creeks where you're seeing more of the change. So I'll start by saying this isn't our data. This is USGS data that was produced for the whole state of Massachusetts. So this is shoreline change information that they take historical aerials that date all the way back to and T-sheets that date all the way back to the 1800s and just determine what has changed over time. So this is the long-term rate of change over, at this point, centuries. And so they're the ones measuring where the shoreline is, and that's how they determine what's red versus what's green versus those things. Now, certainly that can change over shorter time spans, right? So if you looked over the last 30 years, that might be completely different than the last 200 years. So these are just the state-based data that are out there. And I think what's useful from my perspective, where I was looking at here was just at Francis Street Beach over the 200 years that they've been measuring stuff there, the change has been really, really minor.
That's
There,
good.
that might be variable on what's happening in the creeks and stuff like that, but I wasn't even looking at that. But we don't produce this data, so that's
Right,
just state.
that's important, Kirk. I don't mean to interrupt, Laura.
No.
That you just sort of answered what I was. Well, that's the way it needs to be presented. You know what I mean?
Yep.
What you just said right there, reworded a little bit, obviously, is really important to sell this. Because when you talk at the beginning about stuff, it's hard for people to follow that. Then all of a sudden you're saying, we've relatively the same in the last 200 years down here. That's huge. Because, again, this project is such a great idea and concept. You want to be able to make it less, don't find any negative thing to say. That's all I'm trying to make a point about.
Yeah,
You know?
that's helpful.
If you
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. Like it might be worthwhile to reorder we present this up front. And so we did talk about this in previous memorandums we produced too, where this was the lead, meaning the historical conditions that have existed out here. So that is really good input, and I agree with you. And we can organize kind of the way this works when we present it in the future.
I agree with being as positive as possible, but I worry that if we say this hasn't changed much and we give the impression it's not going to change much in the future, people will go, why do we have to vote for this?
I don't know if that was what they'd say.
Well, I think they would. Well, if this is gonna cost, pick a number, X million dollars, people will say, hey, they said it's not gonna change. It hasn't changed in 200 years. What do we have to do this?
This is, we have to talk
Well, you
about.
can really answer that.
That's what we were talking about.
All right.
But think of it as, like, you look at where Wally's house used to be, look at that.
Yep.
That bulkhead, you were at the last meeting, weren't you?
Yep.
Were you at the last meeting? I can't remember. So, we talked about that bulkhead, the wooden bulkhead that now you can't build anymore.
Yeah.
I love the stuff that was built without a permit that wasn't perfect. That area is so solid because of what was put on the ground to build the house that used to be there. It's like left that way, where they have the little picnics. So, or whatever they do down there. But my point is that if it's not changing, that will sell the project better than having all this, we're gonna get flooded and we're gonna fill the street with dirt, then we can't, you know what I mean? Like, you don't want that to be the leading commentary on this. I don't know. I like this so much because I know what it's gonna do for visitors and people being able to walk down there. The street is crowded with other, a lot of people. You go down there on a Sunday morning, there were so many people walking on that skinny little sidewalk with all the telephone poles. It's like, this is ridiculous. We can do better than that. You know what I mean? That's how I'm looking at this. I'm not looking at this as like I'm looking at this as like a permanent easy street type place that's not easy street. That's how I kind of see it.
I think in the public messaging, we can be really clear that I think like you're both right. Matt, like that we need to be clear that the water levels and the amount of flooding that we're seeing is changing. And this project is intended to address that while also, creating a great space for people to access the water. But because we have seen these patterns of minimal erosion, we believe that the dune proposal will be successful and will withstand for a long time. So I think it's both.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like it's really the difference between two processes, right? We have a stable beach setting in terms of the geomorphology, which means the way the sand moves and erosion occurs. But we have changing harbor and water level conditions on a regional scale that influence, what's happening with flooding. And so there's change and not change, so to speak,
right,
in this whole project.
For the flooding models that you showed, when it does overtop the newly constructed dune, are you seeing a decrease in water depth on the other side?
Yeah, so that's the second model, which is why I was trying to push through that before.
Okay,
Laura
sorry, I
said-
stopped us. Here's the
because
second
they
part.
kind of go together. But just to real quick answer the other
okay.
question is the easterly winds. That's what produces all these events. Like that's pretty well known. That shows up in our bigger scale models like MCFRM. The real storms that produce problems at this location are due to those easterly winds. Whether it's just a is it driven by some cyclone type condition or just winds in general, nor'easters, that's all in that model. And that's how these storms really come into play. So yeah, it's a good point, and that we've kind of vetted that out through this process. So that's in there.
Okay. We ready to keep going?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the second piece of this is really then looking at what Leah was just getting at, which is like, okay, what happens now with the project in place, whether it's beach overlook or dune swoop, with the water and the velocities that are induced through that storm process. So as reference, that little black line, this is the beach overlook result here. The black line on the right-hand figures is where the project was put in place. Anything where you see, the purplish colors, that is the floodwaters that, obviously can come in from other areas, such as further down Washington Street there to the northwest. And then the arrows are velocities of flow. So what we're looking at here is when you put this project in place, what happens to flood depths, flood extents, and velocities throughout the area. And these two figures show existing conditions on the left and proposed conditions on the right. And for these scenarios, we're looking at bigger storms because we have to assess, is this project going to do something negative to neighboring environments or Washington Street or anything like that? So this is a 2032 year event here. I will say the depths do go down behind the project slightly. You'll see that in a second. The top figure is the incoming storm surge. The bottom two figures are the receding surge that goes out. And we're really focused on the velocities and flood extents through this area. So the project does provide some localized benefits. And if we obviously look at smaller storms, it will actually limit flooding in that specific areas where it's not coming in strongly from the north areas. Next slide. And so here's kind of the comparison of the velocities where you have existing conditions, you have the beach overlook scenario on the far right, and then you have the difference between the two at the right. And so what you're really looking for here is if you see any in the far left-hand figure, if you see any red or blue pop up, that's a big change that's occurring. So you'll notice there's one little blue area in there that's a reduction in velocity. The key thing that we're seeing here is the volume of floodwaters that comes in is slightly reduced, and the water coming into the area behind our project or proposed project has to come down Washington Street from the north because it can't come in over the beach. So you might see changes in velocity there. So if you scroll down to the next figure, now we're getting a bigger storm event. Again, this is a kind of a 100-year present day condition. Go down. Slide. And again, you can see that reduction in velocity of blue on the far right there. That's a pretty critical location. So we're basically stopping flow coming through that area under this storm event. It actually works for this 100-year storm condition here. It doesn't let water in that way. But you'll see some of the reddish pink further to the north on Washington Street. And so just think of it this way. You're basically trying to fill a low-lying area behind it. And the water used to come over Francis Street Beach. Now it has to come from that north pathway. So the velocity to fill the basin increases in that area. And so that's one of the things that we're really trying to look at as we go forward. Next slide. And here we're getting really big. This is a 10-year storm in 2030. We're looking at how water goes around the project, what the velocities do. Again, we already vetted in the previous model what happens with erosion and how that changes to the project itself. Next slide. And so here again, you see that same reduction in velocities and depths behind the structure or the project, and then increases in velocities down Washington Street. Next slide.
Kirk, can I ask you a quick question?
You can.
So this little green thing that we see in the existing is water moving very quickly through that pathway.
Correct. Yeah.
And when we see the blue here, we don't see that happening in the project. And then when we
Correct.
see the blue here, what we're saying is by putting in the project, we are slowing down or
You're
eliminating
mitigating
that
that
movement.
jet of water that's coming through there. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Yep. So this is, again, this gets a little bit more into the regulatory stuff that you have to do to get these projects approved. But we looked at these 3 points or 3 locations where we see changes in velocities at the project. And so 1, 2, and 3, you can ignore that one little building that's in there. I know that's gone. And so the table there shows between existing conditions and proposed conditions, what happens to the peak or the maximum velocity. So at 0.1, it went from 0.3, that's water flowing down Washington Street feet per second, and it increases to 0.9 with the project in place. And that jet that Laura was just pointing out at 0.2, it went from over a foot per second down to basically nothing. That 0.1 is just the water flowing down Washington Street behind it. And so it's a decrease in the velocity. And so we plot up where we see increases, which is 0.1, and look at it relative to damage curves. So what these curves are in the figure to the bottom right are if you exceed these curves, meaning if you're up to the top or the top and right of this figure, that is going to mean you're going to have damage to the road, you're going to have scour, you're going to have damage to buildings. But you can see both our red and yellow, which is the increased velocity in proposed conditions, are well under all the curves, which means this is good. It means the project does not induce velocities that are so much higher that we can expect scour or damage in other locations. In fact, it reduces velocities directly behind Francis Street Beach that would potentially cause problems in this area. And this is in a lot of the projects we look at, this is not always true. Meaning we put a project in or a proposed project in somewhere and it creates increases in velocities that would induce damages that are above these curves that I'm showing here. And so this is all really good news for this project from a regulatory perspective, that it really reduces velocities in areas where we want it to reduce velocities, and it does not substantially increase velocities to damaging levels in other locations.
Okay, great.
And then the last slide. So what's the key takeaways on this piece? One of the things that Laura pointed out, which I was circling back around to, is these adjacent connections for this are really, really important. So especially on that northwest side, or in this case, the left-hand side of the figure, the connection to adjacent landscape is really, really critical here, because those are areas where you do see these velocity increases that can cause problems. There's no increases of flood depth or extent of flooding on neighboring properties, so that's good. We haven't changed that, by putting this in, we haven't made flooding worse for anybody else in the area. It would be the same thing. In fact, we've reduced velocities behind the structure, and then the increases that we see on Washington Street are minor, really don't cause any damage increases. This is something regulatory agencies usually ask about. And so those two combined modeling approaches really provide everything you need to kind of assess the project, assess the maintenance requirements, so on and so forth. The one thing I would say is, based on the velocity momentum here that we see from the surge, this is why we're recommending a small landside retaining wall. Doesn't have to be much, just to capture during these larger storm events any sediment that might overwash the project, so we don't get sediment maintenance issues in Washington Street itself. And that should fully function based on that. It doesn't have to be any higher than about a foot.
Kirk, from a permitting standpoint, you may not be able to answer this. We can ask PAR as well, but does that mean that we should be looking at developing this project concurrent with Puddin, the cottage, also developing their feature?
Yes, that'd be ideal. Yep.
Okay.
Or at least have a plan in place where that connection can come into existence. I know they're a willing participant here. without too much of a time gap.
Okay, thank you. What other questions are there?
Like the last way he explained all this, I think this is good. Personally, Matt, do you agree with this? Like the way he's encompassed all the different things into this. I'm just thinking of how it gets, it gets accepted.
I don't want to derail the whole conversation, but I really want to look more at the slide before. We can do that offline.
Which one? This one?
Yes. Yes.
Just to understand it, Rachel.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes. Yeah. Is the data on the graph relevant to the existing velocity, proposed velocity points above the graph?
So the ones above the graph are just the legend, so that you know that red was existing and yellow is proposed, and they do correspond to the data in the table for those points right there. That's the actual results. So it has to do what those curves are those are numerous studies completed that looked at what happens when you have certain depth of water and certain flow velocity of water, and what can it damage and cause problems with. And it does everything from, very light structures to really 2-story buildings to every curve is kind of a different thing. The fact that we have the yellow, which is really the key thing, because that's with project, below all those curves means you're basically in a very low risk velocity depth combination, even for a really pretty big storm event that happens to correspond to the biggest storm we've looked at.
Got it.
That's a good sign.
Okay.
So the regulators, if I am understanding, would be looking at, okay, is the dot of what the project is causing, intersecting with one of these that's suggesting it could cause damage?
Not intersecting, more above it. So
Above it.
We've had
Okay.
cases like where, say, the red was at at 1.5 meters on that water depth column, and maybe over a little bit, right there, let's say.
Yep.
And then the yellow goes way to the right of it.
Yeah.
Like over
It's
by
a big
2.5
increase. Yeah.
meters per second. That means you've crossed the threshold for significant damage risk to buildings, roadways, scour, all kinds of stuff. Depending on what curve you're looking at on this chart. So what we don't like to see is the red, the delta or the difference between the red and yellow being really, really high in crossing a bunch of those curves. If the red was already up there, then that was what was happening during existing conditions without a project, and the yellow kind of stays above all the curves. Well, you're not increasing the damage to anything. It's already was damaged. This just basically tells me that the velocities here, although we increase them, they aren't super high. And yes, you're flooded in the area. People know this now, right? When you get a storm, you flood in this area, but it's not like our project is going to create problems and increase the velocities or flood depths.
Right.
And that's what regulatory agencies need to know and understand.
Sorry, what threw me off was the table at the top was in feet and the graph is in meters.
I know.
Yeah. So I was looking to make those track. They didn't. So sorry. That was my bad.
That is not your bad. That's been a common complaint for this, but the data in the curve, that chart is obviously it's very complicated. It's from a technical paper and I can't change it to feet.
Yep.
So,
I totally get it.
yeah.
But that was just so I was looking for tracking there and I was like, this is
I can't believe you picked up on that and looking at this slide for 30 seconds.
You're not the only one that's picked up on that. So that's good. Yeah.
Wow.
Right now, I'm fine.
Other questions?
And I don't want to spend a lot of time, and I don't know if this is a quick answer, about the metal bulkhead to the southeast of the beach where the kayaks are. And does the model show any effects of that metal bulkhead on our beach and our proposal here?
You talking about that building?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you mean this existing bulkhead right here?
Yeah. Yes.
By the
Now that was put in and not that long ago, and so we don't really, it doesn't really show historically, you know,
Mhm.
how that installation is going to do. And then I'm wondering, it showed a lot of velocity in front of that on some of your mapping. Yeah, you can see that it's increased velocity there. I don't know, you know, if you can interpret what we're looking at there, the increased velocity, is that increased wave action? Could that be reflecting off of that bulkhead, scouring in the beach area? I know we're running out of time, but
Yeah, so I'll give you my quick take on that. So maybe I'm not seeing. I don't see significant increases in velocity. So that light blue is actually a reduction there, and that light orange is a very minor. You want to see those deeper colors. However, what I can tell you is when I look at waves, that vinyl bulkhead does redirect some wave energy into the project area that does increase or exacerbate erosion slightly.
Can we see that in any of these?
You're not going to be able to see it in here because this
Okay.
is more about velocities, but I know that when I look at the wave velocity combination, that
Mhm.
bulkhead that you guys are referring to does, under a certain wave approach, reflect some energy. You can just imagine it's a corner, right? And if you send a wave in kind of from more the northeast into there, it does bounce off that vinyl bulkhead and then bounce into our proposed project area. So it does cause some increased reflected wave energy in that corner, which isn't ideal, but it isn't.
but you're not that concerned.
I'm not concerned about the velocities for sure, because we kind of cut that off with the connection there, which is why the connections are so important. I'm not overly concerned with the waves either, because the waves, when you get the biggest waves, they are driven out of that east, really strongly from that east direction.
And what about
And then it has
scour?
less play.
Scour from those waves, not that big of a concern?
It's more of a concern than if it wasn't there. But it's not horrible from what we've
Okay,
seen.
we can discuss it another time.
Yeah, it takes a little bit different look than what I have here in these slides for sure. But it's a valid point.
Okay, thank you, Kirk. That was so clear. I want to make sure we get over to Hazen for stormwater modeling. I'll point out that I think that our big, you know, based on the recommendations here, our understanding is, and we're gonna have to coordinate with Todd and the PAR team when he's back next week, is that we're looking at probably not, you know, which is good from a permitting standpoint, not needing any kind of, you know, core treatment to the dune, but the dune itself should be successful. But that considering a landscape like a small seat wall height wall that would just keep the sand from washing over Washington Street is our big takeaway here, as well as needing to prioritize the tie-ins, especially with the neighbor to the north. So
yeah, if I can, Laura, just the 4
Please.
points, biggest points, and you hit
Yep.
3 of them.
Okay, what I miss?
One is we're not recommending any kind of structural need inside the dune or seaward of the road.
Okay, good.
We are recommending for overwash maintenance and just general stability. And actually it does kind of serve as a last line of defense, that landscape kind of sitting wall on the backside adjacent to the road.
Uh-huh.
Third thing is connections are important, you hit on. And the fourth thing is whether dune swoop or beach overlook doesn't really have a significant difference on our results. So
Okay.
you can choose whichever one you prefer from those two from our perspective.
Okay. Thanks for summarizing that. That's awesome.
For me. So I'm not trying to argue with Kirk. I was trying to help our process through. Kirk used the process a low wall. Our historic preservation friends will not view that kindly. So if we can come up with a better descriptive term and then say that we're open to whatever material it be constructed from, so that we don't collect opposition, that could be helpful.
A good way to
Okay.
put it.
See, like, does a seating bench or something, you know, a bench or something like that, do you think that would be received more favorably?
dirt, we can say it can be made of wood, we can shingle it, we can do whatever, just don't portray it as wood.
Okay, and we can really look more at the material expression of that with the understanding that,
You can ask them what would be historically appropriate.
Exactly.
Is it putting in, like foam poles or, is it putting in something like that along there like you see the dock? They'll tell us.
Don't mind in the least.
Yeah.
I think we can definitely pull from some of the vocabulary that we see at Easy Street, although there isn't a more solid component, the rough hewn benches, and we'll come back to you with more ideas about materials to discuss.
So if that's all round timbers into the ground along the edges, it might mimic that, yeah.
Okay, are we ready to go to stormwater? We have about half an hour to get through this piece, and we have a few sketches we can get to as well. But so I'm going to turn it over to Ben and Mitch from Hazen. Do you guys want to drive, or you want me to click through?
If you could do it, Laura, that'd be great.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that'd be great.
All right. Sounds good.
So yeah, just kind of an update on stormwater. We've been doing some modeling, and really what our goal was with this is to kind of characterize what the potential for what flooding looks like under existing conditions, sort of in that red area, if you have rainfall during a high tide cycle. And then the other two things we wanted to look at are, how would that flooding be impacted by some potential modifications to the drainage system? And what is the potential for kind of reducing that street flooding by installing some kind of green infrastructure or rain gardens in those roughly outlined orange areas? So just kind of some background and overall context for what we did.
And can I just remind everybody of one thing? What we're going to see today are the first two components, which is the existing condition and the potential for infrastructure improvements. We are not yet looking at the rain garden and the salt marsh center, because I know we're just sort of receiving direction on what to do in the parking lot here. So that's to come.
Yeah, and actually, Laura, while we're on this slide, I'll just point out,
Sure.
when we're talking about the drainage system improvements, there are essentially in this area two existing outfalls, one on Meter Street, one on Francis Street. And we wanted to look at the potential to redirect flow from the Meter Street outfall to the Francis Street outfall, sort of from an O&M standpoint, one less outfall to deal with, and then kind of look at, does that negatively impact things?
Okay, thanks, Ben.
Yeah. So in terms of our approach for the stormwater modeling, for rainfall, we looked at sort of some industry standard design storms, and that's called an SCS type 3 distribution. And it's just kind of a very normal approach for evaluating how stormwater infrastructure works under different conditions. And so the rain events we looked at were a 1-inch storm, a 3-inch storm, and a 5-inch storm. And those approximately correlate to a storm that you'd see once every 6 months. The 3-inch is something you'd expect to see approximately once per year. And the 5-inch is something you'd expect to see about once in every 10 years. In terms of the coastal condition, we coordinated with Wood's Workgroup and Kirk's team and looked at a present day tide condition, just as sort of an initial screening effort. And really the condition we looked at is, as we all know, kind of the drainage issues and flooding in this area are most likely to occur when you have this intense rainfall at the same time as a high tide. So those are the conditions we looked at. So these next several slides are going to be some depictions of what our flood modeling showed. I'll just walk you through what we're seeing here. The different colors that you see kind of more in the beach area on this slide. You can see the legend on the left-hand side, but the reddish color is about more than 12 inches of water. And understand this is kind of in the water at this point. Orange is between 9 and 12 inches. The yellow is between 6 and 9 inches, and then the green is like 3 to 6 inches. So this scenario we're looking at right now is just like an existing conditions 1-inch storm without any modifications at all during a present day tide cycle. And what you can see is, there's a couple little pockets of flooding on the street, but fairly minimal, not a big concern. Now, this next slide, the difference here is we've now eliminated the outfall on Meter Street and redirected flow into the Francis Street outfall. And what you can see along Washington Street is now there's some increased flooding. Essentially, what's happening is the existing outfall on Francis Street, when it's high tide, doesn't have enough capacity to move all of the rainfall runoff and water out. So it kind of backs up into the Meter Street outfall and comes out on the low point on Washington Street and just sort of sits there until the tide cycle goes down. So, what we're seeing is eliminating the outfall on Meter Street does increase the potential for flooding during rain events that occur at high tide. Now, moving into a slightly larger storm, the 3-inch storm, which is approximately a 5-year storm. What you can see, and this is, again, with the existing outfall on Meter Street and on Francis Street, now you have more flooding on Washington Street, sort of some limited areas in the 6 to 9 inch range, and most of it's still sort of in the 3 to 6 inch range. And, when these model predictions are kind of validating that, the amount of flooding during these rain events, it's a problem, it's bothersome, but not such a large amount that it can't be managed with potentially some green infrastructure or rain gardens in those areas that we've been talking about. So this is sort of validating that, the rain garden and green infrastructure approach is worth pursuing further. Again, this is the same 3-inch 5-year storm, and now with the outfall on Meter Street consolidated, and you can see the flooding on Washington Street increases. And finally, looking at our biggest storm, you can see that, similar pattern, just the amount of flooding on Washington Street continues to increase. And, once you get into these larger storms where both of the outfalls are kind of beyond what their capacity is, the outfall consolidation, removing the one on Meter Street doesn't make as big of a difference. But we still think that, for the more common events, eliminating the outfall does have the potential to increase flooding on Washington and Meter Street. So just kind of some key takeaways at this point. Again, consolidating the outfalls and taking away the outfall on Meter Street does increase the potential for flooding if it's raining during a, at or close to high tide. The amount of water, ponding on the street, the kind of the scale of the flooding is not huge. So therefore, we think that looking at the rain gardens and green infrastructure in those areas we looked at on the first slide, it's definitely worth pursuing further. And that's kind of our next step from a modeling standpoint, is redirecting that street flooding into a rain garden or some other kind of BMP and seeing how the flooding goes down. And then finally, I think this is something that's been talked about quite a bit. More into the future, as the sea level continues to go up and the groundwater continues to go up, it may be worth looking to more extensive drainage improvements to kind of augment the potential green infrastructure and rain gardens. So kind of a quick update.
That's great. Thanks, Ben.
Went through those quickly, but yeah.
No, that's good. I have a follow-up question. So I know we laid out these different scenarios. So in scenario 1, let me just go back to the first one. In scenario 1, you laid out, you're showing the existing condition with no tide gate. And we're seeing that with the step of combining the two outfalls and introducing the tide gates, that we're seeing additional flooding in these really smaller storms. Do you have a sense, or can you get a sense from the modeling, if we just maintain these two outfalls but put tide gates, will that improve the condition?
We did model that scenario as well.
Okay. Yeah. What did you find?
We found
for these 3 scenarios,
Yeah.
it did not make a difference as compared to scenario 1.
Really?
But we should be very clear that that is not true for certain storm surge conditions, for certain future conditions, and for all storms.
Right. Okay. So that's
the
just
tide
the very
gates
near term.
will make a larger impact during in the future with sea level rise. So irrespective of rainfall, the tide gates will prevent the ocean from coming back through the outfalls and flooding the street.
Okay, thank you. What questions do we have from the group?
Okay, fine.
Yep, go for it.
Tide gates has never been brought up once. And that term said, so what are we talking about with that? I don't think he's said, this has been said, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
We have been talking about it. Yeah. So you're a little hard to hear now, but I think
About the pipes with the flashers. Okay. Okay. You gotta be clear about that. I know what that is. All right, never mind. Okay, so, and this is for you, Dan. Raising Washington Street. To add to your list of 3 things. Raising it, I don't know how much it should be raised. 6 inches, 8 inches. I don't think it needs to really go much higher than that. However, that has to be part of your discussion with this, in my opinion, as far as what improvement that creates versus just pretending that we're not doing it, because that road has got to get raised, regardless whether this project happens or not. Does that mean it's almost like they're separate, but they're connected if the project moves forward? That has to be part of it. At least the way we're looking at all the scenarios. Because look what happened with Easy Street. Easy Street is sinking. The water isn't rising, the street is low. In the place where it's low, the water comes out of the catch basin and fills the road up. And people don't really know that that's what's happening. But the flappers don't work. And that catch basin is lower and the pressure pushes the water out of it. What I'm saying is there has to be some kind of model associated with raising the street for what you just talked about.
No,
That's all I'm saying.
we're not talking really about raising the street anytime in the near future, like Easy Street. The intention of this project into linking it all the way downtown is that it buys us a lot of time that we might not have to raise Easy Street. Washington
Really?
Street.
I thought we always had a plan to raise it a little bit.
It would
Potentially.
It would offset it by a long, long time, that was the idea. So I actually kind of.
Yeah, but what about, hold on a second, you guys. You got him over here now, right? Sorry, I have to bring up Nantucket stuff. Forget about the project for a second. That street gets ground up again for something. There's other work that's got to get done on that street. If Mark was here, I think there's some stuff that wasn't ever completed. Water work when the phase 1 sewer went out. That's the last time that road got dug up. Wires, in other words, okay, let me say it all a different way. If the town has to do any major work on Washington Street, that we could incorporate raising it 6 inches, that has to benefit this project, regardless of whether it's part of it or not. I'm trying to make a correlation. Because in other words, this is one of the things we're really good at here, is we don't think about all the other things that we should be doing when we dig up a street and block the traffic and make a big project happen. That's the way I look at this. We have to raise that street if we do anything large in the next 10 years or whatever. That's what I'm trying to say.
Can I add, adding to what you're saying?
Yeah.
2 things. If we go raising it, I think that's a valid thing to do too. How much would this project here and, putting something on the beach side offset the need for it? Then that would give us an idea of when to raise it. That's what I'm thinking.
Well, yeah.
And then
It costs more though, that's the thing.
That's the thing. I see what you're saying. Well, I like what you're saying about having to raise it, but it will give us an idea of the offset time wise. So that can be another.
No, I get that.
Yeah.
It's the chicken and the egg before the horse and the cart. I get that. I'm trying to make it more positive with the water if the road got raised. So in other words, let's say he put in an asterisk next to the 4th line and said, if and when any major work with electric, with sewer, water, etc. gets done, put the wires underground, if that ever happened, right? We don't know that. Because it's really not underground, it's in water, in dirt, it has to be sealed and all that kind of stuff. That could cost way too much money to do or not worth it. But I mean, point is, if that gets done, then I think there should be something saying this will help advance, future scenarios. That's all I'm saying.
No, I get it, I understand what you're doing.
You know?
I know that's a good idea. I just know that, totally separate again to what you're saying. When we're talking about putting stuff underground, I did a bridge construction thing about 15 years ago. And they wanted to put some stuff into the bridge. Eventually, they wanted to get some electric wires.
Under it.
They just put in ducting and said, whenever the electric company is
Yeah,
ready,
conduit.
it's ready there.
Yeah. I'm just
Yes.
That's what the.
sorry about all that. I
No, that's
mean I thought we talked about this before, but maybe I'm wrong. But I just think that has to be like somehow recognized some way, just like moving the senior center, which should be moved. Unfortunately, we screwed that up last time meeting. And getting those buildings moved at the thing, is helping with potential pumping, potential rain gun. In other words, that's my mindset on Washington Street. But I'm just gonna fix some potholes and that's it. If we dig that all up, we have to be like coordinated review. What are we doing? So, and I even think we should go as far as having some kind of a sketch engineering plan for the drainage, what it would look like, raising the catch basins, whatever we have to do to make that street higher than it is. Not a lot higher, but just a little bit higher. The flooding is not that bad. It depends on the low spots. Like North Water Street is it's only floods where it's low.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's some schematics in the coastal resiliency plan that show the roads with the conduits underneath, so that eventually, as something has to be raised, everything comes up together. So you don't have to do it twice. It shows it engineered and built that way in areas like this or down at Brant Point. So eventually we get to that. But so do we get there, or do we bury it again, or do we, that's the question.
Can't be doing stuff twice anymore.
Yeah, well,
It's just too expensive and too ridiculous.
you sound like you're in favor of planning.
With all this planning,
Nat's become a planner through this process.
He is, all right.
I mean, but
No, it's common sense.
we built two
Yeah.
terminals without knowing what was coming 1 year later.
Oh, I know.
Okay, it's just, this is,
I've teased you about
I
it.
know.
I have a question about that consolidating the outflows increases flooding.
Yeah.
Is that because the outflow that we're consolidating to, the pipe is not large enough?
There's two main reasons. One is that the Francis Street outfall pipe is not big enough, and the other is that the Meter Street catch basins, or really the lowest elevation Meter Street catch basin, is lower than the lowest elevation Francis Street catch basin. So combining the two sort of reduces the available pressure in the Francis Street side, and allows flow to come out at that low elevation catch basin.
So would it be
at the
better,
intersection of.
would it be better to, or I don't know if it's better, but did you kind of look at the reverse? So like if we didn't consolidate to the Francis Street, but we consolidated to Meter Street, would that be a better situation?
They're the same size outfall,
Yeah,
so
the Meter Street
they're
is-
both.
So they would both, regardless of which outfall you get rid of, it's still gonna cause flooding on the road.
Most likely,
For-
and
For
You know, I
certain
think what-
first ones. Yeah.
what we'll look at is, again, with the rain garden implemented, if the situation improves at all, if that provides enough sort of storage to alleviate that additional flooding. But at least from an existing condition standpoint, reducing two outfalls to one is more likely to cause street flooding.
And Ben, this is Charles, just to clarify what the what the assumption was in terms of the tide. This is all assuming high tide. So what elevation is that? 3 or something? So the difference in elevation is just not there to push the rainwater out.
Exactly.
That's the reason, you know, even having you need the 2 pipes or you need a bigger pipe because you don't have the head differential to push the flow. So is it conceivable that a small pump that just gives it that much more of a pressure differential could make the difference?
It could. Yeah.
So it may not be, we may not be looking at it this huge pump station scenario. Maybe it's just a reservoir with a pump that can push it through these pipes, just give it a little bit more of a head differential.
Yeah, I think that's something we could definitely look at and, you know, worth evaluating.
Hey, Ben, this is Kirk. Just one point of clarification on that, right? The tailwater condition you're using in the harbor still is a dynamic time series, meaning the tide goes up and down.
Correct.
It's not just set at a
Correct.
single high tide. You just aligned the peak of the SES type 3 with high tide.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like we said.
The peak
So
rainfall is happening at the peak tide.
yeah, so these are in that respect conservative, since the tide obviously has a tide cycle that goes, like, you could have the peak occur at low tide and you wouldn't see flooding anywhere. So just
Exactly. And that's true, Kirk. And also, you know, I think we're being conservative with the assumption that there's going to be some future sea level rise. So,
right.
You know, the low tide condition may be more like the high tide condition in the future. So we think it's a good assumption.
Yeah. And the other thing I would just add is that there's no condition, no matter what, in my opinion, that is a negative for putting tide gates on outfalls.
Agreed.
The only negative you can have there is, like, I have to maintain it and it's sediments in or something like that. That would be the only negative. Although that could happen with just an open outfall pipe too. There's no negative flooding impact by putting tide gates on outfalls.
But that maintenance issue that you just brought up, the clogging of the outfall is a real situation, right? Right now, those pipes are plugged.
Constant.
And
Yeah, I don't doubt that at all, for sure. Yep.
admit that that's a real concern.
But that's the area that doesn't have bulkheads, like Easy Street, where you can actually get to stuff.
Right.
They're just like in the ground, you know, kind of just.
And the low
Land.
shore
That's
transport of
not-
sand is just constantly clogging those pipes up.
Does this mean that we just have to have an operation and maintenance manual so that we can have the regular maintenance? Is that what we're getting to?
I mean, we're talking
Can't even
every
pick up the
storm.
seaweed.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
It would be really, really very frequent.
Very.
But then you're gonna ask, how realistic is that when we've had things that we've known that we've had to take care of for years?
The only other thing that we could discuss is piping further down Washington Street Extension where we don't have these outfalls that are directly into the sand.
Yep.
And that's something that Vince and Leah and I and Jeff discussed, that the town may be looking at as some kind of policy that we kind of are headed in that direction. Because it's a constant maintenance issue on these.
One other question of modeling, I know that we'll have the worst flooding we've had, sort of in my lifetime, is when we have wind from a certain direction and the water doesn't leave the harbor. We get a tide, the water doesn't really leave the harbor because the tide has left it. And then the next tide comes and it just goes higher. And so that's what, I don't know if you've modeled it that way, but when we have water all the way up to the base of Cliff Road or all the way down there,
it's sort of certain, and I don't know exact direction, but it's north, northeast or something, and
Any of the north,
Yeah.
nor'easters, you
Yeah.
know, it's just stacks the water up in the harbor and the tide doesn't have the chance to go out and flush it.
Yeah, so if you were running your models as the tide going up and down, our worst occurrence is the tide doesn't go down. I don't know if you've factored that in.
Understood. No, we haven't looked at that yet, but we certainly can, coordinate with Kirk's team and make sure we're on the same page with the coastal
That
model.
may direct us to do, sort of move it somewhere else sooner, like we're saying. So.
And we may be doing
Makes
that because of water quality issues on top of the resiliency. So that's where things are headed.
Yeah.
We want to eliminate a lot of these outfalls into the harbor just for water quality.
Okay. Well, this is really helpful information as we're advancing the project. And I think what we'll be able to do with the next run is look at the introduction of the green infrastructure and understand how it can help mitigate the flooding that we're seeing in these models.
The green infrastructure, both in Salt Marsh parking lot and.
That's right. Yeah, and we can follow up maybe about the Salt Marsh parking lot and how many spaces we think we can lose to create more space for stormwater, but we could take that offline if you want, Leah.
I don't mean to interrupt because I had to leave for a second. I don't know what we talked about, but we talk about like the pipes, just gravity flowing, which has no motors, no things that have to be replaced, versus having some pump system collecting water to pump it wherever. That's a big deal. Like, you know what I mean? Like to try to figure out what the right thing is. I just see that, how do you maintain all these outfalls to not be clogged is going to be process. You know what I mean? I just think it's a long-term answer is something in that parking lot you've talked about.
Or further down.
Yeah, I know, but going down there from there, or however that's going to end up working. What about something at the bulkhead of getting some sort of an agreement with the people that own that building, goes out and finding a way to pump the water down to their bulkhead and out or something? Is that possible? Has anyone ever approached
Like
them about?
where the condos are?
Yeah, anyone ever
They have an
approached them?
outfall in the bulkhead.
They do?
But that's their own.
From the town? No. I'm just saying, is there some kind of, negotiation that could work for something? I'm just thinking about.
We could approach them, but the thing is, it's a condo association, so you have to get all of the condo boards to approve.
Okay, all right, forget it. Forget it, but that's fine. Just
No, I'm not saying it's impossible.
no, but I deal with this every day, this kind of stuff. Whatever. Okay, I just thought I'd bring it up.
Okay, we have a couple more slides. We have 5 minutes. So Lynn, do you want to quickly tour us through these, and we can spend more time on them next week as if we don't really have enough today?
Sure. Did we want to move this conversation about the salt marsh offline, or should we discuss it here?
I don't know, Leah, what do you think? What would be most productive?
I think we
So-
can do it offline.
Yeah, let the
Okay.
staff people that work for the town do that, Laura.
That's fine.
No, they know all about that.
We will work through the nuances with Leah and Vince and the team. Okay. Do you want to talk about this section, Lynn?
Sure. This is a good preview for what's to come next week as PAR presents their work. We took the line work that Liz from Land Bank provided us of the delineated coastal dune and the coastal beach areas. And so it's actually mapped here in red that you're seeing.
A little bit light, but it's
a little
this red
bit light,
line.
a little bit light. But we can see in plan view that the dune hugs the edge of the sidewalk where the sidewalk currently exists, and then it moves closer to the road bed, and it hugs right along that road bed there, and then tucks back towards the water. And why that's significant in terms of just like looking at the plan is that with the coastal dune area, we're unable to build any structures on top of it. And when we're thinking about a landscape wall, for instance, we wouldn't be able to put a landscape wall through the coastal dune, for instance. And so it would have to hug the wall. In this sense, it would preclude perhaps a sidewalk, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And maybe we can just flip to the section here, Laura.
Yeah.
So section A is that section that crosses where the sidewalk currently exists, and section B is a cross section where the sidewalk doesn't exist, where the beach grass goes directly onto Washington Street. And so what we heard last time from the PAR team is that they're currently thinking about, and we're developing with them, a pile supported boardwalk where the dune can shift below the pile supported boardwalk and have reach a dune crest of elevation 8. We also heard from Workgroup Kirk noting that a landscape wall would help with maintenance concerns in terms of the overwash or the sand migration. And so in these sections, I guess we can talk about the top section here with the sidewalk. We're beginning to look at an option where there's some sort of landscape wall, perhaps 18 inches, perhaps 12 inches, that could also serve as a seating element for the sidewalk. But this landscape wall can serve two purposes. It could hold sand migration from entering Washington Street or sidewalk, reducing that maintenance concern. But also it could be designed to adapt to the raising of Washington Street in the future. So if you imagine Washington Street, it could help hold back that grade even further. And it supports for just a sort of a backup, as Kirk mentioned, in the erosion. And so from that landscape wall, this dune crest, which again, we'll look into further detail next week with PAR team, we could pull that dune crest a little bit back towards the Washington Street, thereby pulling more of these elements like the boardwalk closer to Washington Street and less encroachment onto the coastal resource areas. I think some takeaways that we're seeing in here, as we looked in the plan before, the delineation and the dune itself may.
1 second, please.
Yes, please, Rachel.
Go back one slide and Vince has a question.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thank you.
So this is kind of an important question, and I hate to bring up difficult things. Where you
That's
have
okay.
sidewalk under section A with sidewalk, is that right up to where the grass line is? And there's a reason why I'm asking this, because the current condition is it's a multi-use path on the side of the road for cyclists, walkers, all that kind of stuff. But that area is also really exactly there where the
Yep, this is what we're calling the sidewalk. It's a shoulder today.
exactly. But that's actually quite important for another thing, for the turning radiuses of trucks coming down Francis Street so they can go up Washington Street. They actually have to get nose in there from time
That
to
was
time.
done on purpose for that. Guess who asked to have that done?
Oh, it was you.
Yep.
Okay. That's really good to know, Vince.
Sorry.
That car at Wisnowski got done before she left.
My dad's a truck driver.
It's a true story.
I had to learn how to drive articulated trucks, and I said, I know how they're swinging that. They have to get in there.
Yep.
Yeah,
So
that,
like-
and when we spoke to Mike Burns, he said to keep that sidewalk or whatever we're gonna call it, keep it where
Not
it
really a
is.
sidewalk, but,
Right.
but since we fixed the intersection that never got fixed, ever, has made that less important. That was done to make it so that the trailer wheels didn't cross over.
Oh, but now we have the bigger turning radius.
Cutting the corner has made that less necessary than it is
But
today.
it's still necessary.
Oh, yes,
Someone's coming down Francis to go onto Washington. They have to
Still-
turn all
but
the
it's
way.
not, I would consider that a sidewalk, sort of mirroring what could happen.
Yeah.
That's okay to do, in my view.
Back to the circles.
Yes.
Yeah.
You certainly don't want to put, benches on it.
No. But technically, if you saw this before, Lynn, before the turn was fixed that nobody wanted fixed, but everybody wanted it fixed at the same time. So that got fixed in May of a few years ago. That, if that wasn't like it is now, you would be like in a whole different place with your, assumptions of this area.
Yeah.
That would not be able to be touched. Now, it's not needed as much. That's the best way I can explain it.
It's not just trucks, it's large, people towing large boats, all of them kind of need that.
Well,
Yeah.
but they follow better. It's the long trails. It's the 64s, 68s. That's the ones.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that's really helpful to understand. So I think what we're seeing now that we actually have the sort of hardline delineation lined up with the survey is that this poses a challenge for, I think if my understanding is correct, we're not going to be able to carry a sidewalk where one does not exist today because the dune is delineated to the edge of the road and this is 22 feet. So we need to come up with either a way that you can cross and sort of have an accessible access point from here, because there's no sidewalk on this side of the road either, or that this could be treated as more of a shared street. It just, the delineation coming up to the edge of the road is a challenge.
We had this conversation before, Laura.
We have, but I think it's just the precluding, how are we going to treat the sidewalk now that we have this technical information?
You want, didn't we have this conversation about Meter Street crosswalk and moving it or something? I know we had this conversation.
We have a crosswalk there too, so we could get you a drone image. There's an,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, we'll study this further and come back to you with ideas. But it's going to change, the way that it was drawn in those two concepts, we're going to have to look at it slightly differently.
Okay, so just Laura, just real quick, a little historical thing here.
Sure.
Before the intersection was fixed, okay, widened, shoulder, whatever we want to call it, that crosswalk was way smaller. So the people crossing didn't have to go, oh my God, I better start running. Okay.
Yeah, right.
That's what happens now.
Really bad.
But I mean, that was a quick solution to, hey, we had to fix this. Now we have this mile-long crosswalk that's probably, substandard like Tom Nevers entrance. That's why that got made small. But vehicles aren't moving 40 miles an hour and bearing right at 30. That's not the same. But I think that having that conversation that we had before that, Rachel just brought up about the crosswalk, getting more people to Francis Street is the key problem that we're going to have.
Yeah.
I think they need to go cross by the kayak area, to me, because there's no traffic there and the road is wicked narrow. So there's not really any issues for pedestrians. But that's, though, at leaving that existing, truck turning spot open and extending it, if there was a way to do that legally, that would be the best if we could do that. Because you're not going to get a sidewalk on the right side of Francis Street. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
It's just not contiguous unless there was a path through to the senior center and cross over there. I don't know.
Yeah, we looked at that, if it's going to depend on the redesign. So I think these are all things that we can solve. We're going to need to look at some tweaks to the approach.
I think this is reminding me of Wynn Street, Matt. There's no real perfect answer.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Okay, I know we're past time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. We had a lot to talk about. We have a lot to talk about next week.
Yeah.
So next steps, you're going to hear from PAR's team about more of the development of the structural ideas for next week, and then we can talk more about how we proceed with these with the form of the boardwalk that we're going to develop further. So
Thank you so
anything else?
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks so much to to Kirk and to Ben and Mitch. Great material today. So we'll see you all next week.
Since we're the next, can I just update you on one quick thing?
Of course.
The next meeting is October 3rd, 2025, 11 a.m. And the October 10th meeting is
Yeah.
canceled.
Yeah.
So, will you be sending out additional information about that?
I already sent it out, but I'll send out another one.
Yeah.
Send out another one? Okay. And anything else? Additional
Thank
questions,
you all.
comments, concerns?
Just a suggestion, I think, Historical Commission or HDC be, brought in early and
Yeah.
let them say what they'd like
Yeah.
like, tell us what they want.
Right.
You know, I
How
think we should
much
get it in there.
information do they have on this? We talked this a while
We met
ago.
with Holly
Okay,
and showed her the designs.
okay, perfect, okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, do we have a
But I just
motion
bring them
to
in and
adjourn?
let them say we want it to look so like this, it'll be easy. I so moved.
Yeah.
So moved. Okay, I think we have to do a roll call vote if
Adjourn?
Matt's already off. Okay, motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
It's a Malcolm.
Second?
Second.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, aye.
Aye.
Aye, okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Malcolm's on that meeting, right? Do that, but.
Yeah.
Over now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.
Much, everyone. That
Okay,
was
see you soon.
information. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
All right.
I didn't know you guys were voting on it.